Hello and welcome back to another episode of Math with Son. Today we're going to be doing some multi-step special right triangles. So let's get into it. So there are two different types of special right triangles. There's the 45-degree ones and the 30, 60, 90 ones, which these only have 60, which means that there's another 30 degrees there. So these are multi-step right triangle problems. So they're a little bit harder. You're going to have to do one thing to do the next. If you are provided a hypotenuse like we are here, that's the hypotenuse, you have to take your hypotenuse on a 45-degree triangle and divide by the square root of 2 to get the leg. So that means that this guy right here and that guy right there, for that matter, both of these are going to be 10 divided by the square root of 2. Okay? So that is what we would have there. 10 divided by the square root of 2, and also here 10 divided by the square root of 2 there. So that is the hypotenuse here on the other triangle. So this also has a hypotenuse, and if that hypotenuse is 10 divided by the square root of 2, if that is this hypotenuse here, we would have to divide that, and I'm going to write the division symbol, by another square root of 2. Well, what happens if we had 10 over the square root of 2 divided by the square root of 2? That's like a fraction over a fraction. And if that happens, you would have to, some of your middle school teachers might say keep, change, flip, where we have to take this, turn it into a fraction, and flip that fraction. So this is going to be 1 over the square root of 2 there. Okay? So the reason that I did that was that's just what happens when you divide a fraction by another fraction. You have to flip and then multiply. And we get 10 over the square root of not 2, but square root of 2 times square root of 2 is square root of 4, which is 10 over, well, what's square root of 4? Well, the square root of 4 is 2, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. Now, there are other things that we could have done ahead of time. For instance, you could have taken 10 over the square root of 2 and rationalized it by multiplying by radical 2 and radical 2. I don't recommend doing that on these problems until the very end because you never know if it might simplify at the end without doing that. Okay? So let's try number 2. Here, we are provided a leg. This is a leg. And then in order to get to the hypotenuse, you multiply the leg times the square root of 2. Leg times the square root of 2 is equal to the hypotenuse. Okay, so that means that this triangle here has a 7 square root of 2, and I want to find x, which is another hypotenuse. So I would have to take 7 square root of 2 and multiply by another square root of 2, because you take your leg and you multiply by the square root of 2, and you get your hypotenuse, and that makes 7 times the square root of 4. And 7 times square root of 4 is 7 times the square root of 4, which is 7 times 2, which makes our answer 14 for this one, okay? So that means this part is 14, and our previous part was 5. Let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. These problems might be similar, but I think I'm going to do a 2-part video. I'm going to do like the first 8 problems in the first part, and then the next 8 problems in the second part, because these, I think you might want them all. All right. Here, this is a leg. In order to get from the leg to the hypotenuse, you have to take the leg and multiply by the square root of 2 if it's a 45-degree triangle. It'll be different when we have 30, 60, 90. And here, this is also a leg, and we're trying to get to the hypotenuse. So you have to take 9 radical 2 and multiply by the square root of 2, just like the last problem. And that makes 9 times square root of 4, and 9 times square root of 4 is 9 times 2, which makes 18 for x. All right, let's see if they get any harder. I think 4 is slightly harder. We got here, this is a hypotenuse. In order to get from the hypotenuse to the leg, you got to divide by the square root of 2. That's how we get our leg. So that makes this 9 divided by the square root of 2, which is the other hypotenuse. So if that's the other hypotenuse, I have to divide by a square root of 2 again. So this is like our first problem. If you're dividing by the square root of 2, if we're dividing by square root of 2, I'm going to write it as square root of 2 over 1. What happens when we divide by a fraction? You flip the fraction that you're dividing by and then multiply. So it's going to be 1 over the square root of 2 when we multiply, which makes 9 over the square root of 4, because square root of 2 times square root of 2 is square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. So we get a final answer of 9 over 2 for x. All right. Moving right along, ladies and gentlemen. Here we got a good one. I like this one more. We have the hypotenuse, and we're trying to get this leg over here because that's the leg that has the triangle that we are caring about. So in order to get from the hypotenuse to the leg, you have to divide by the square root of 2. And in this case, it cancels the square root of 2's out. Like you get the square root of 2 divided by the square root of 2, and it just turns to 5. So that means that this leg here, which is the hypotenuse of the other triangle, because it's across from the 90, is 5. So this part right here is 5. How do we go from this hypotenuse to this leg? You would have to divide by the square root of 2. It's the hypotenuse divided by the square root of 2. So that means that this answer right here is 5 divided by the square root of 2. Your teacher might be okay with leaving it that way. If you want to be politically correct, you're not allowed to keep a radical on the bottom. And if you have a radical left over as a final answer on the bottom, you can always multiply by the square root of 2 and the square root of 2, or specifically whatever the square root is of, and in this case it was the square root of 2. So this is a square root of 2. That's why these are square roots of 2. We multiply, we get 5 square roots of 2 over the square root of 4. The square root of 4 is 2. So the official final perfect answer would be 5 radical 2 over 2, which if you really wanted to write that, you could write 2.5 square roots of 2, but I don't think we need to yet. All right, here we have a hypotenuse. We are looking for this leg right here, which is the hypotenuse of the other triangle. So you take 9 square root of 6. If you have the hypotenuse and you're getting your leg, you divide by the square root of 2, just like before. So that would be 9 square root of... Well, we got options. I think that I'm going to actually divide it. What is the square root of 6 divided by the square root of 2? Square root of 3. Okay? So that means that this part right here is 9 radical 3, and now it is no longer a leg of this. It is the hypotenuse of the other triangle. And if we have a hypotenuse, we have to take your hypotenuse and divide by square root of 2 to get this leg of the smaller triangle, which is an answer, but if you want to make it fully correct in simplest radical form, you multiply by those square roots of 2 to get rid of the radical off the bottom, because it will magically become the square root of 4, and the square root of 4 is 2. Square root of 2 times square root of 2 makes square root of 4. Square root of 4 is 2. And now we're going to take 9 square root of 3 times the square root of 2, and that makes 9 radical 6. If we had not actually divided these two, it might have actually been a little bit easier, because you would have ended up with the answer almost immediately. Okay, we got 2 more. These are quite important because they are first problems with 30, 60, 90. Actually, you know what? I am going to stop there. I'm going to just keep these as the 45, 45 versions. And then in my next video, I'm going to do all of the 30, 60, 90s, which is quite a few. But everything from this point forward will be the 30, 60, 90s in the next video. I hope to see you there.